Okay, we're going to re-adjourn the Planning Commission meeting for June 26th. I'm going to ask the city attorney is there anything that we need to discuss relative to our closed session?
Nothing to report from closed session.
Great. Thank you. Moving on to item B, which is approval of minutes. These are the minutes from the meeting of June 12th. Do I have a motion or changes?
I move approval of the minutes.
Got a first, second by Commissioner Donor. We already did that. The meeting started at 5:30 tonight. Yep, we went into closed session. So we have a motion by Vice Chair McCann, a second by Commissioner Donor. Let's go ahead and vote. And that item passes. And just for clarification, the Planning Commission met tonight at 5:30. We started the meeting per the notice and went into closed session for half an hour. We're back re-adjourning on item B, which was approval of the minutes. That takes us to item C, which is public comments. We do. Okay.
Yes, Chairman.
Anyone wishing to address the Planning Commission during the public comment section or on an agenda item is asked to complete a request to speak form, which is available at the door. It looks like this. The completed form is to be submitted to the Planning Commission Secretary prior to any individual being heard by the Planning Commission. Any person wishing to address the Commission on a subject other than those scheduled on the agenda is requested to do so at this time. In order to conduct a timely meeting, there will be a 3-minute time limit per person and an overall time limit of 15 minutes for public comments. A portion of the agenda. State law prohibits the Commission from taking any action on a specific item unless it appears on the posted agenda. And we have one request to speak, Richard Gardner. Good evening,
Hello,
sir.
Commissioners. I'm Richard Gardner from Capistrano Beach. And I picked to have a comment regarding public comment because I think that a couple of issues that should be before the Planning Commission maybe are citywide and perhaps also applicable to other cities along the coast. One of the items is the process by which condo conversions occur. And if in fact in that process there is a tremendous change in value, the value meaning that if you have a duplex or a triplex and it's sold as one property, it may sell for less or significantly less than if it were converted into 3 projects or 3 condominiums and sold individually. So in that process where the profits or the value is increased, the city has an opportunity, believe it or not, and you also have the ability to knowingly set the kinds of requirements that you would have, knowing ahead of time if it were to be a condo conversion, you would have asked for this or this. Or if after it's sold, maybe there's some other benefits that could happen, just like before a developer develops a large vacant parcel, they may be asked to include some benefits, say, for schools or for parks or for other public amenities. The value is in the community, and the value there when sold becomes a private property. So I'm not sure whether it's something that you might want to agendize and look at how that process occurs and when and what times during the process do you get to set your planning. In a similar area is the question of the impacts of urban runoff. And I know that the city of Dana Point has tried to be a leader among all of the co-permittees in South Orange County with the County of Orange to provide the highest quality treatment of water, of runoff that could pollute the oceans. So that is an area where, again, it usually happens on an individual property where you say, okay, if you're going to put the shopping center here, we're going to require this and this and this for your urban runoff so that you don't just let it wash off. So the same could be true of multiple developments. Just
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments. Okay, moving on to item D is the consent calendar. We do not have any items on there, which brings us to item E, a public hearing for site development permits SDP 16-001 and SDP 16-0002 to allow the construction of 2 detached dwelling units on each of 2 contiguous sites in the residential duplex RD14 zoning district at 34466 and 34468 Via Verde. Is there a staff report?
Good evening, Chair Nelson, Commissioners. Senior Planner Belinda Dinez is going to lead our presentation tonight.
Thank you, Matt, for the introduction. Good evening, Chair Nelson, Planning Commissioners, and members of the public. My name is Belinda Dinez, Staff Planner for the proposed project at 3466 and 3468 Via Verde. This project is before you for its second hearing before the Planning Commission. The project was originally heard back in June of 2016 and has since been revised based on the direction given by the Planning Commission at the original hearing. The project is subject to a site development permit for all residential development except for single-family homes. The subject site is located in the Capistrano Beach neighborhood. The proposed project involves demolition of an existing single-family residence and construction of a duplex on one lot and construction of a duplex on an existing adjacent vacant lot. The adjacent parcels are designed in a courtyard configuration with a shared driveway access between the 2 parcels. The subject site is outlined in yellow, and the stars identify existing duplexes with similar configuration of a shared driveway easement in the immediate neighborhood. Here are photographs of those duplexes with shared driveways in the immediate vicinity, one being right next door. Here's a photograph of the site from the street view and an aerial of the immediate neighborhood. This property is located within the RD14 zone, which stands for Residential Duplex 14 zone, which is nearly the entire area northwest of Palisades Elementary School, zoned for duplex development as shown in the light green. Most properties in the immediate area are developed as duplexes. The scope of work involves construction of the 2 detached duplexes. Modifications from the previous plans includes a reduction of living area, a reduction of number of bedroom count from 5 to 4 bedrooms. An additional 6 uncovered guest parking spaces have been provided on site. The lot coverage has been reduced from 39% to 33%, and the revised elevations include an updated soft contemporary architectural style. Here is, for reference, the previous site plan that was proposed, and the revised site plan here identifying the required covered parking. The 2-car garages have been oriented so that it doesn't face the street and are side entry, 2-car garages, one for each of the 4 units. The additional guest parking is highlighted in hot pink, and the reduction of the rear units in terms of building footprint you can see in orange. The proposed project complies with the residential duplex 14 development standards with all of the development standards associated with the project. I would like to correct the staff report in the table in that the proposed lot coverage is actually 33% as opposed to what is stated in your staff report as written. As a side-by-side comparison, here is the front street elevation from the previous design to what is being proposed. The 2-car garages off of the front and the entryway are actually now oriented inward towards the entry driveway. And so you can see that the bottom elevations show an entry, or a wood arbor for the yard area towards the front, rather than the driveway or driveways for the garages. Here's the rear elevation as viewed from the back side of the property. In comparison, in terms of the architectural improvements, there have been proposed elements such as the wood trellises, additional features for the windows themselves being recessed with mullions, and also the stone proposed on the posts and also on the walls themselves to give greater articulation to the rear. As you can see on the side elevation, this is also facing the driveway. Additional consideration has been given to not only giving greater dimension for reducing the mass and scale of the proposed project by differentiating the height and roof forms, but also breaking up the walls so that it gives greater dimension on that side. Also, this is the side facing the adjacent properties. The number of windows has been reduced to address any privacy concerns, smaller windows facing the side, and also breaking up of the walls to further the reduction of mass as well. Here you can see the color rendering in terms of how the color and materials help to soften the exterior, and the Planning Commission did encourage the applicant to work with staff to enhance the architecture as directed by the Planning Commission. City staff did send the proposed plans to our third-party design consultant for recommendations, and the applicant did follow through with those recommendations to help articulate the overall design. And here's the color rendering from the side. Here's the landscaping plan showing the areas of yard areas and landscaping throughout. More landscaping is proposed between the rear units as the footprint of the back units did decrease. As a result, the Planning Commission must make the following findings in order to support and approve the project. Staff provides justification and analysis in support of the findings as described in the staff report and draft resolution. Staff has received several letters from neighbors with specific concerns related to density, general design compatibility, neighborhood compatibility, and number of occupants associated with the project. Staff recommends approval of site development permit 16-001 and 16-002, subject to the findings. And I would be happy to answer any questions you may have regarding the staff report and the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Bring it back to the commission for questions. Staff? Anybody? Commissioner Donor.
Belinda, could you tell me if the drawing that we have in front of us, has that been modified, the rear part of the property?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Donor, for the reminder. Before you, the plan sets that you received with your packets had been redlined because the proposed wood trellis did not meet the permitted projections requirement of into the required front and rear setbacks. And so it had been written into the draft resolution and explained in the staff report that that would be modified. And so the applicant has provided you with a revised site plan showing the wood trellis on the back and front being pulled back to meet that requirement. And so you have a copy of that revised site plan showing compliance with the setback.
Any other commissioners have any questions for staff?
Yes, thank you. On the diagram, where are the yards? The outside yards?
So let me refer to the site plan for reference. The front setback is 20 feet. The side setback is 4 feet on each side, and then the rear setback is 15. So this, this chart refers to it on the first 3 lines as the required setback and what the applicant is proposing. And so we can see that here, the dimension on the, right here, is 20 feet for the front setback, so there's a projection of the wood trellis towards the front. The required side setback is 4 feet on each side here, and then 10 feet comes across the back, and it's actually parallel with the rear property line. Or, excuse me, 15 feet for the rear.
So that covering, is that somewhat commensurate to what the minimum is expected? As far as allowing for outside coverage or outside places to be?
So if the wood trellis, in this case, for example, in the front setback, it is 17 foot, I believe 6 inches from the front. It can actually be 15 feet from the front property line. So that wood trellis could be extended 15 feet from the property line, if that's the case.
And I wasn't quite sure of the driveway area, as, you know, someone's turning into the drive. What kind of product is that? Is that kind of a concrete driveway or a slate or what?
I would have to direct that to the applicant if they have the material for the driveway.
Yeah, the material of that, the pavement over there is a permeable material. It could be either stones or what do you call it, or permeable concrete. Okay, we're giving the option for the owner to decide which one, but it should be permeable material.
So is it fair to say that you will prepare this area before the houses go up for sale, because this obviously has to be one product, and each house can't put in their own little
Correct.
area of the driveway?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Commissioner McCann, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Just to confirm, so they're compliant with the height, the max height, and there's no variances requested or required,
Correct.
correct? Okay, thank you.
I think that is also, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Do we have speakers? Thank you. Carl Iverson.
Good evening, Carl Iverson, resident of Capitol Beach. It's in my neighborhood. You always be aware of what's going on in your neighborhood. Architecturally, I think they've done actually a pretty decent job with it. I'm an architect by profession. I see both sides of this picture real clearly. They have made an attempt. It's looking pretty good. I think the biggest concern that all the neighborhood has is the density. We're looking at 16 bedrooms on that site. And to answer your question, Ms. Murphy, there's basically no yards other than the driveway. So you have a 4-bedroom house. Are you going to put kids in it? Where are they going to play? It's my feeling that's going to happen is we're going to end up with multiple families in those homes. The garages are going to end up being filled with stuff. And where's the parking going to take place? On the street. That's the prime concern I think that the neighborhood has. They do have a right to do what they're asking to do, but you also have the right to request that they come back with a less dense project. And they've started out with 5 bedrooms. We're down to 4. I think 3 would work really good for the whole neighborhood. I mean, that's 12 bedrooms that would be there on that piece of property. We're just trying to enhance the quality of life as best we can in the neighborhood, and I'm sure you all understand that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Joffrey Long.
Thank you. I'm the owner of 34458 Via Verde, which is 3 or 4 doors down, depending on which lot you're talking about. And I've owned the property for about 20 years. I think it's a great neighborhood, and part of the reason, obviously, that it's a great neighborhood is because of the restrictions that have been placed on building. I agree that there's no need for anything this large. There's no need for this many bedrooms, and it's too much density for the area. And what the gentleman who just spoke talked about, the dangers of having 4-bedroom units with no yards, and who's going to live in those units. Another concern I have is that I think that 4-bedroom units in an area like this are a perfect target for people who operate these illegal Airbnb hotels, where they don't have somebody just staying in a room in their house that they live in. They have a house that's all set up as separate hotel-like units. And if you can go on Airbnb and see that people are doing that. So I think there's a lot of danger there. Even with the changes that the developer has proposed, I think it's still out of sync with the area. Too large, too many bedrooms, too much density, so I'd be opposed to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie Aros.
Good evening. My name is Julie Aris, and I live near the proposed project at 34466 and 34468 Via Verde. I urge the Planning Commission to consider the impact of this project on a neighborhood that's already suffering from a ridiculous amount of street parking and structures that seem to be built almost on top of each other with little landscaping or breathing room between properties. With 2 structures per lot and more bedrooms per building than any other duplex on that street, the project is too dense for Via Verde, and we are worried as you will set a precedent by allowing this to happen, and more will come. While it might serve a developer to max out his property to get the most possible revenue per foot, it doesn't serve the community, and neither preserves nor protects our neighborhoods. We still have several vacant lots and older structures that will continue to be built throughout Capistrano Beach and Dana Point at large. I respectfully request that rather than blindly adhering to the letter of the zoning code, permitting projects over and over that have maximum density and minimum setbacks, that you consider the unification clause contained in section 9.05.13 of the municipal code. Does this project enhance or complement the surrounding properties and Capistrano Beach at large? The neighbors say no, and we're hoping you'll say no too.
Thank you. Rich, is it Hine?
Good evening, Planning Commission. My name is Rich Heine. I live in Capo Beach. And I've listened to a lot of what's going on in Capistrano Beach, and this particular project in terms of how it's going to be complementary with the rest of the properties around what's going on in Capo Beach. And I happen to agree, it is going to be complementary. This is going to be 4 more sober living homes to go with the 40 we already have. Thank you.
Great, and just if I could admonish the audience and ask, please don't, we don't get to make decisions on whether or not group homes come into this town. It's not a purview of this commission, and it would actually help very much if we leave that issue outside of this forum, because it's not something that we can actually weigh in on. With that, I'll go to Tony Nelson.
Good evening, Tony Nelson, Capistrano Beach. According to staff, the project before you tonight meets all the minimum requirements of the Dana Point Municipal Code. The community, however, is asking you to consider something else. Section 905.13 of the Dana Point Municipal Code reads, "A new building or structure shall be designed to create a unified plan with an integrated architectural theme that is compatible with and will complement and enhance the subject and surrounding properties." We believe the project at 34466 and 34468 Via Verde neither complements nor enhances the immediate street or the surrounding neighborhood for the following reasons. It is too dense, doesn't matter what the use is. It contains 8 bedrooms per lot. That's just way too much. This is compared to the usual 4 bedrooms or less on most properties, and at most we have 6 bedrooms in the case of a couple of duplexes. This is way over the top. The project number 2 is unattractive in terms of its only 4-foot proximity to existing dwellings. Its lackluster architectural style, okay, they added an arbor an arbor that, might not even be maintained. It's not part of the existing structure. It has tiny windows. It's not an attractive street presence. It's very limited landscaping for the 4 large families that may occupy these homes is ridiculous. Really, children are going to be playing in the driveway. They're going to be playing at the end in the bushes. It just doesn't work. This is not for families. It just doesn't work. They also require the destruction of some beautiful trees that actually protect people as they go up Via Canyon and they can see the trees instead of seeing structures. This is going to be almost at the edge of the outer limit of that lot, way further than other structures, and it's not going to be very attractive for anyone in the neighborhood. If the homes are fully occupied by adults, they could require a total of 16 parking spots, 32 if the property is converted to a use that contemplates 2 persons per bedroom. And that happens a lot. Ordinary rentals, Airbnb, whatever. We often can get a lot of people in a bedroom. On most nights, Via Verde Street has no extra street parking, like most of the streets in Capistrano Beach. Most of our streets are absolutely stuffed with parked cars every single night. We have no street lights. It's difficult for anyone, including visitors and emergency vehicles, to find an address around all the parked cars. It's just too much. I respectfully request that you don't make matters worse in an already burdened community by approving this project. Just 2 dance. Thank you.
Thank you. George Meadows.
My name is George Meadows. I live in Orange, California. I own that property in Villa Verde, neighboring the project discussed here. My property is address 34464 Villa Verde and is completely next door to this project. I'm concerned with a couple of things. Number one is the condition of the driveways and with respect to the problem of the rain. And nowhere do I see anywhere on this project the area that was going to be covered with rain when it rains and how to deal with that problem. My property has a sump pump in the driveway between 2 units. I own one. And it's pumping the water out back into the street. I don't know what they're going to do with the water flowing down the street and on this project. Also, I feel that the density is going to be unbearable. When I screen my tenants, I ask if they have any children, and that my property is not adequately allow for children to play. There is no place for them to play and be kids, ride their bicycles, and so I'm for the cut down in the scope of this project. 4 bedrooms is too much for this property. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Richard Gardner.
Richard Gardner from Capistrano Beach. I don't want to reiterate what many of my neighbors have already told you, so I'll pick on the items that have just been alluded to. One was that it's apparent that these two properties are two separate property, two different parcels that are each duplexes, but as you pointed out, there's a common driveway, and what's it going to be made out of? And I think what we heard was pavers, which would be a pretty good thing, since that does allow some perviousness that would allow some of the moisture or water in a rain to actually go between the pavers and percolate. On the other hand, as you just heard from the last speaker, the other properties, and I know several, that have some pumps, and when there is rain, the water is caught in a large tank and pumped out to the street. Now, these places were built in the 80s and early 90s, and it's remarkable. It was even before the first MS4 permits were issued. Even before the regional board required this sort of a BMP, the city at that time, and maybe even the county, was putting in this sort of a best management practice to put that water into these storm drains that take it out. So that one, going into this a little further, I would say, if you own the property below these lots, the concern would be, what if it rains a little more, or the pump isn't working, then you may have some runoff, and it could be an issue for the people down below. So in that, to alleviate that potential problem, you would require what's called a bioswale to be put in at the lowest part on the property, so that normal small amounts of runoff could go there, and it would be treated by grass and other vegetation and percolated. I don't think this has the ability to even do that. But let's go a little further. Once you're done looking at the MS4 permit and ability to handle the water that falls on this nearly half acre, then you come to the question of the sewer. So if in fact we're talking about, how many bathrooms are we talking about here? 16 bathrooms? I think we're talking about 16 bathrooms, 16 toilets. So all of this wastewater has to go to the street. It doesn't go down the hill. There's no easement in place. Now, the property has at least a 15-foot drop-off from the street down. So this in itself could be an issue for both properties. So I hope you look into the agreement to handle the common utilities that you're talking about.
Thank you. Rose Sparks.
Rose Sparks, Capistrano Beach, Via Verde, across the street. And we have a few others from across the street who I don't think are speaking, if you'll raise your hand. And I agree with most of what has been said, but over the weekend, some of us did a little survey of the number of houses and duplex between Via California and Camino Capistrano. And there are currently 23 parking spots on each side of the street. And this is what we consider our neighborhood. And it is not all duplexes, as was mentioned. It's 15 duplexes, which would be 30 units, and 15 single-family homes. And I did write a letter. I assume you read my letter. And I agree with the issue of Code 9.05.130, maybe not being just considered when this was reduced from 5 bedrooms to 4 bedrooms. It was, it seemed like last year that it was a big concern, the parking and the density and the appearance, so as I recall. So thank you.
Thank you. James Bailey.
Hi, guys. I live directly next door, 34464 Via Verde, and my concern is, so my landlord, he requires low, not too many people living there. So we got a 3-bedroom house. There's 2 people living there, me and my fiance. Downstairs, we got Penny. And I'm concerned with my parking. I park in front of my house every day. I drive a big truck, won't fit in the garage. Got a rack on it, do construction. Anyways, my concern is with, my neighbor, the person who lives in the house where we're talking about doing the building, he parks right behind me. We're very friendly with the parking. Sometimes I give him a little bit of room for the garbage. Anyways, my concern is my parking. I rent and I consider it my house and my little spot. And with all these rooms coming in, we heard a lot of people can live there. Very fortunate to only have one neighbor downstairs, very nice, older lady. And she's also very fortunate to have us. And so my concern is just, we've been there a long time, and I don't think the project needs to go further. I think smaller, maybe 2, like what we have. Maybe they can match what we have, not 4. 4 won't fit. And with that, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, looks like we've got all the speakers. If you didn't hear your name called, please come on up and make sure you introduce yourself. Tell us your name and your address or where you're from.
Yes, my name is Michael Ahern, and I own the unit 34462, which was actually in the presentation. That unit was built in 1980. That was 47 years ago. From the presentation, it was almost an impression as though, well, this is kind of what the neighborhood looks like. It's not. This is a very high-density proposed project. I and my wife, we bought this property in 2010. And today, as with always, it's 2 units, 2 adults in each unit. So there's 4 adults in the unit. There's 2-car garages, so people don't have to park in the street. Back at the same time, I bought another unit, a duplex, 3 streets over, Via San Juan. Now, Via San Juan is a much more high-density street. It also has an incredible crime problem. Eventually, I had to sell the property because I couldn't even rent it out because the police were coming so many times. And I equate that because of the high density of the project, of Via San Juan and the high density in that area. I've spent a lot of time on Via Verde. It's a very pleasant street. I would disagree with the presentation. I think the majority of the homes are single-family homes. I could have, when I bought these properties, I could have come before you. I could have said, hey, look, I'd like to build a big, massive unit. Would that have benefited? I didn't do that because it only would have benefited me. It wouldn't have benefited the community. It wouldn't have benefited the city. It would not have increased the quality of life for the residents. So to make an assumption that a duplex that was built in 1980, it does not relate to this project that's being proposed, a very high density. And I'm here today. I don't live there, but I'm here for the tenant that lives there, a widow. She is an elderly woman, and she really doesn't, who's been living in this community for a long time. She does not want this development, and so I'm here to speak for her. And I ask that the commission actually take a walk on the street. Take a walk on Via Verde. Also take a walk on Via San Juan and see the differences between these 2 streets in your city. Via San Juan with single-family homes is the place, is a better living experience for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, bringing it back to the commission. Close the public hearing. Comments, questions, discussion
I could just make
items?
one comment real quickly, just to reinforce what Chairman Nelson had said earlier. There's been some comments about the fact that this could or could not be occupied by a sober living group or become a group home. Just to clarify real quickly, that's something that really can't come into consideration tonight. Your job here tonight is just to look at the codes, apply them to the project, figure out if you can make the findings or not without a
giving any consideration to which group of people may or may not live in the home eventually, if it's ever constructed.
Great, thank you. I got one quick question for staff, and I don't know if you can answer this question. We've seen a couple of these projects over the last year. One of them was on Via Canyon at Fortuna, and there was another one at right across the street on Via Canyon. Do you happen to know how many bedroom were in those duplexes?
I do not.
Okay.
But I can provide that for you.
Any comments, questions? Anybody want to lead off on your thoughts on the project? Mr. Donor.
Well, first off, I certainly understand the concerns of the neighbors. When this project first came to us, I went to the property, walked it, looked at the number of cars parked on the street, and looked at the number of bedrooms. It was 5 bedrooms proposed plus a loft, so it wasn't just 5 bedrooms. Also, the exterior design was very minimal, and the parking was limited there was limited guest parking, and so they complied with 2 cars per unit, but did not have adequate guest parking, in my opinion. So our task is to weigh the rights of a property owner of what they are entitled to develop against the concerns of the neighbors, but also take in consideration the legal requirements that we have. So we have a requirement to follow our zoning, and we have looked at this property, and I've spent time with this, and staff has spent time back with the owners, and there's limited barbecue space. Certainly that's an issue, but also there is some private space, and the development has met the minimum requirements, and they've met the requirements that have been put forth in the zoning that it's required for Dana Point. So I think that it's been an improvement, and I'm going to have to support the project in spite of the problems that could occur.
Chair Nelson, if I may.
Yes.
The project on Via Canyon that was just approved, that was a 4-bedroom unit duplex.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just want to make sure that I remembered it correctly. Thank you. Vice Chair, you have anything you want to add?
Sure. It's obvious to me that the neighborhood is not in favor of this, or at least that's what's been come out and represented. I don't know if there are others in favor or not. I'd have no way of knowing. But my thoughts are along the lines of Commissioner Donor as well. I do have a couple specific things, but I'd like to point out that the property as redesigned, the project as redesigned, is almost 2,000 square feet less than what was originally proposed, with the numerous, 10 less kind of spaces if you, or no, 8 less spaces if you consider the bedrooms and the lofts as extra spaces. That's almost, 2,000 feet, that's like a home. So it's kind of one less home almost. With respect to, there's been a lot of speculation of families and who might live there and where would they play and whatever. Unfortunately, or fortunately, that's not for us to decide. The project has been, in my opinion, thoughtfully redesigned, taking into consideration what we kind of threw at them before. I think the architecture is much better. People may or may not like it, but I think it's it's clearly got more variety and interest than what was proposed before. I find that it meets with the codes. I do have a couple of things specifically. On the conditions of approval, I'd like to see added a prior to building permit issuance, a requirement that they provide a copy of the recorded easement. Prior to grading permit, it says that submit an easement to the city for review and approval, but they should produce a recorded one prior to building permit. And that should also address the utilities someone brought up with respect to any common utilities, any common sewer, and so forth. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Vice Chair, Commissioner Opel, do you have any comments or questions?
I was actually not on the commission when this first came through, so this is all new to me, but I did go back and review all of the documents from when it first came through. So it looks like the applicant has voluntarily reduced the square footage of all the units. They've increased their on-site parking, and they've also worked to bring it more into scale with the neighborhood by improving the architectural aesthetics of it. So while I fully understand the concerns regarding the potential parking issues that could occur, I think it's compatible with scale in the neighborhood being the 2-story, and it takes full advantage of the depth of the lots, because this is a much deeper lot than a lot of those next to it, so it's going deeper than the others and increasing the number of units on it. So I'm actually in favor of it.
Thank you, sir.
Commissioner Murphy.
As all of these kinds of issues come up, and it impacts where we live and who we live near, and what we want for our own communities, whether it's for the community of Dana Point or our own communities in areas of the city. To me, at first when I saw the project before they had made their changes, I was completely against the way the product came out the first time. I have to admit, at this time, I'm neither assuaged of my concerns, nor am I persuaded that this is a project that properly fits and works well for the neighborhood. However, I have to look at the criteria that we have been given, and especially as to suitability of the site for the proposed use. And it seems to me that has been shown that there is proper suitability, and as much as some of us would rather have a smaller project there with fewer numbers of bedrooms and large and smaller footprint, at this point, it passes the test. So I would have to support it.
Okay, thank you, and I'll just go on the record here, because I was one of the opposing, at least at the last meeting, I opposed delaying the project. I thought we should take a vote, and I think in that case, I was probably wrong, because what they came back with was far superior to what they had brought forward that evening, and that evening I was in favor of the project. So needless to say, I'm even more in favor of this, but for a number of reasons that I'll lay out here real quickly. First of all, as proposed, it not only meets the development standards, but it provides a number of additional parking spaces that are required. It has a reduced lot coverage. From a density perspective, there's a disconnect between density and intensity. From a density perspective, this is well within the range of what's completely permitted and what's built throughout the neighborhood. Intensity's about the scale of the building and how many bedrooms. And I know that we've approved at least 2 of these projects with 4 bedrooms within the last year. I don't know if they're being built at this point, but they've come before us, and there hasn't been any concerns about the bedroom count. And I think in at least one case, we had no extra parking. So they had garage parking only, and then they asked for a site development permit to waive the extra parking space requirement because of a driveway. So when you look at this project, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, staff, this project could be developed as two individual projects that don't have any relationship to each other and have two separate driveways. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So we've got, in this case, one driveway, so we're actually increasing the potential for on-street parking, whereas a individual development would eat up two driveway spaces. I can't do the math, but that's at least one, if not two parking spaces on the street, which sounds like in this neighborhood is really important. The layout in the proposed project is definitely suitable for this site. It's got a minimum driveway, and you know, when you look at, I know some of the complaints have been about open space. There's well over 600 square feet of what are going to be pavers, most likely, that are providing area for parking instead of for grass, for trees, for something that may be more environmentally sensitive, all in an attempt, I believe, to address the issues that came up at the last meeting. So it's a difficult situation when you're, I guess, as a developer, asked to provide more parking. When you do, then you run into other challenges. But in this case, I think they responded well to the commission and to the people that were here at the last meeting. Like I said, it's not overly dense. It may be intense, but it certainly meets our code. It provides a significant amount of relief between buildings. I haven't done the math, but I think there's somewhere close to a 20-foot building separation between the buildings, which is a lot more than other duplexes in this neighborhood, which allows for light, privacy, and again, developing this as one unified project, in my opinion, actually is exactly what our code asks people to do, and when possible, they do it. They've done it here. And last but not least, the design is certainly appropriate for the site, for function and its use. And for those reasons, and the reasons that my fellow commissioners stated, I'm in favor of the project myself. Would entertain a motion. I know that you had asked for a condition. I think that's appropriate and would support that as well.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion. Subject to condition that I'm going to add at the end, I'd move approval, make a motion that we approve site development permits SDP 16-0001 and SDP 16-0002 to allow the construction of two detached dwelling units on each of the two contiguous sites in the residential duplex RD14 zoning district at 34466 and 34468 Villa Verde, subject to adding a condition about prior to building permit, the applicant produced a recorded copy of easement addressing cross-lot access, cross-lot drainage, and all utilities as needed to properly develop and access the site.
We have a motion? Second. Second by Commissioner Donor. Go ahead and vote. And that item passes 5-0. All right, thank you. Moving on to item I always lose my space here. It's all the way in the front, right? All right. Item F, which is old business. There is no old business. G, new business. Report on citywide parking, parking supply and management office options for the city of Dana Point. Is there a staff report?
Will be leading the presentation on this item as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Chair Nelson, Planning Commissioners, and members of the public. My name is Belinda Dinas, Project Manager for the citywide parking community outreach efforts. For those of you who may not be aware, in March 2017, the City Council directed staff to engage in the public outreach on parking issues. City staff initiated a contract with Dr. Richard Wilson, an urban planning professor at Cal Poly Pomona, to facilitate a public workshop and prepare a summary report on issues related to parking. In April 2017, preliminary briefings took place with City Council, Planning Commission, and city staff to discuss concerns related to supply and management of parking citywide. From April to May 2017, the city encouraged the public to participate in an online community survey in order for elected officials and stakeholders to gain an understanding of current parking issues and opportunities from the community's perspective. On May 15, 2017, a joint City Council and Planning Commission study session was held as a citywide parking workshop with over 100 people in attendance. The community was encouraged to participate in an interactive roundtable settings to voice their ideas. I am pleased to introduce to you Dr. Richard Wilson, our parking consultant, who has facilitated the workshop and prepared a report with a summary of findings and recommendations. Dr. Wilson has a presentation to provide with an overview of his report. Thank you, Dr. Wilson.
Good evening.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thanks for the invitation to present to you this evening. It's my pleasure to get to know the city and meet the commissioners and council and members of the public in the public workshop. I'd also like to express my thanks to the staff who organized that public workshop, which is one of the best organized ones I've ever been at. So I think that was a great event. As you know, I may have introduced myself before. I study parking as an academic, and I do consulting for cities, developers, and transit agencies on figuring out how to deal with parking. It's one of the most controversial issues in cities today. Next slide, please. Belinda already summarized some of the things that have been done. Obviously, I looked at previous parking studies, voter initiatives related to parking, and the issues in the various districts in the city, the Lantern District, Doheny Village, and residential neighborhoods. And as Belinda said, I had some listening sessions. I looked at the survey that was completed and participated in the public workshop. My goal here was not to do a comprehensive year-long study process for a parking study. It was to look at what you have and think about how to move forward with some practical actions. In terms of the broad takeaways, first of all, parking, while there's a desire to deal with this issue comprehensively citywide, the issues in different communities vary. So one size fits all is not what I came away with from listening to stakeholders and reading studies. The strong points about your situation are your program to lease private parking for public purposes. That's very innovative. Many cities are copying you. You have a shuttle system that can be the basis for a park once approach and for off-site parking. You have a high-quality physical environment, sidewalks, public right-of-ways, bike lanes, and so on. And I think you have potential for even more sharing of parking between land uses. As in terms of weak points, there is frustration expressed about parking. We heard some of it just tonight in neighborhoods. In the Lantern District, on-street parking is not time limited or priced, so that's a little bit different than many communities. In the Lantern Village area, you have relatively small parcels, which make providing efficiently sized parking structures or underground facilities available. And finally, my view is that your parking requirements are from an era of zoning regulations when the auto was the first priority. So they're relatively high for achieving some mixed-use livable community goals. Next, please. So I'm just jumping right into it. You could have a major study to talk about a vision for parking. I'm proposing one here. I'm not sure this is right, but I think it's close to right. And so what I'm suggesting the vision for parking should be in Dana Point is getting people where they need to be with a high level of customer service, transportation options, parking choices, safety, financial feasibility, and environmental sustainability. So that's sort of the guidepost for thinking about parking choices. And I think there's three principles that could go with this vision. The first is to create order and reduce anxiety by getting the right users to the right spaces. And what I mean by right is a short-term retail customer in the Lantern District is a high-priority user that probably should have a priority use of the on-street parking, for example, rather than an all-day parker. Principle 2 is use resources efficiently, and this has two dimensions. Efficiency physically, in terms of not having parking sitting empty most of the time, so if you have spaces, they should be well used. And also the financial side of it, that dealing with the costs of providing parking. And principle 3, encourage alternative transportation like walking, biking, shuttling, and so on. And the Park Once concept, which encourages visitors to your downtown district to park once and walk between locations instead of driving. Next slide. So, a starting point, I think, I'm proposing an idea of creating a parking oversight committee. Parking doesn't take care of itself. It requires active involvement and management. And so a committee such as this could review parking utilization reports. It could help plan and respond to special events. It could promote shared parking between private landowners. And it can provide information to the public of what's going on and what are the plans for improving parking. Council would want to consider who should be on such a commission, but I could see it having a planning commissioner, someone from your financial review committee, your traffic improvement subcommittee, a city resident, and perhaps a representative of the Chamber of Commerce. Now, this is a long list that I'm not going to read. These are 17 measures that I have developed in listening and reading the surveys and thinking about best practice in parking. Not all 17 apply to each district, but I wanted to just put them all on one page so you could see what they are. They're everything from looking at how you're doing your street cleaning in residential neighborhoods to time limits in busy on-street parking, to using an in-lieu fee to build public parking. So it's a long list. They don't all apply to every place, but if we go to the next slide, I'm suggesting also so that you draw from that list as you move forward. And this is an incremental approach of getting started, taking care of the most pressing issues first, showing some progress, and then building a parking management program. So I've laid out 2 years' worth of actions that you might wish to consider. Citywide, in year 1, I think you could appoint this parking oversight committee. You could adopt the principles, council could adopt the principles, and investigate remote parking for long-term parking. That was one idea I think has a lot of potential, citywide. In the Lantern District, considering time limits on the block faces that are the busiest. Some are relatively free, others, I drove today, were relatively full, so the idea is a time limit would increase the turnover of the most full streets and get better use of those spaces. In Doheny Village, you have a proposed form-based code, and I looked at the code and I've looked at the parking requirements in it. It is an entirely different approach than the citywide parking requirements. I think it's a very interesting plan. Doheny Village is different than Lantern District. It's going to be, primarily new developments where parking management tools can be built in with the development of the village. So I suggest that you consider adopting the form-based code as proposed. With regard to residential neighborhoods, there was a lot of great input received at the workshop. People put stickers on maps, as you saw. And so I think job 1 there is to follow up on specific parking problems in particular blocks and neighborhoods and see if there's an easy solution to that and make some progress so residents feel like progress is being made on their parking issues. For year 2, citywide, I think pilot testing a remote parking lot, producing a first annual report on city parking. In the Lantern District, as you have construction underway, I think you're due to do a new parking occupancy study comprehensively, maybe in year 2, and begin to look financially at how much you're spending on leasing parking for public parking versus how much it would cost to either provide a public structure or lot, and just look at the finances of that and see how that is penciling out. In the Doheny Village, I think implementing parking management measures as development rolls out would be the year 2 task. And in residential neighborhoods, considering residential permit programs in areas where people are saying there's big problems with spillover parking into neighborhoods. So that was very quick, but it's kind of my structure overview. The report provides more detail, and I'm happy to drill down into any particular aspect you'd like to discuss. So thank you for your attention, and I welcome your questions and comments.
Thank you. Any questions?
Just one quick question. You said that in addition to the traffic committee, there would be a technical committee. What does that
Okay,
entail?
I think one of the issues is a technical committee is often created to support the policy advisory committee, and the technical committee would be staff from different city departments, the sheriffs to coordinate enforcement issues, perhaps representatives from OC Harbor. So all the people that are actually managing this system, getting them from time to time all in one room and developing a game plan so they're coordinated.
I have a couple questions for you here. So I was reading through the report. One thing that caught my eye was that there was a note here that the top 4 perceived impacted areas for parking, Dana Hills, Monarch Beach, Dana Woods, and the Gale Shores. I think several of those are gated communities. Did we dig into any of that, or is that just the stuff that we got back from the surveys and on the stickers?
Yeah, that's me directly taking the places people name, but I really do think those stickers and those maps are a resource you have that you can dive into one neighborhood and look particularly at the location of those issues.
Yeah, I think you're in the Gale Shores, right? Yeah, okay. And then I think tonight we're going to try to move things forward. In your presentation, you had the years, year 1, year 2. I'm going to assume that we are looking at all of that at some point as a committee, if this gets moved to the city council, that the priorities could be shifted around, because I have an opinion on priorities and where we should start, and that's probably not why we're here tonight.
Yeah, no, you can absolutely weigh in on sort of where you want to focus the effort. Those recommendations are valuable. I think Dr. Wilson laid out a good framework, and if you think something should be moved up on the list, that's valuable information we will relay to the council.
Perfect. Okay, great. That was great. I really appreciate the report and the insight. I learned quite a bit, and my opinions and thoughts changed a little bit as we went through this process, so really valuable for me. So thank you. Anybody else? Okay. All right, so we'll open the public hearing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. Dr. Wilson, I really appreciate all your effort and focus and you know, bringing all your expertise to bear for our benefit. So maybe if we get good parking situation, you'll come down and visit us every once in a while because I have a place to park. I do have a couple of questions. I found a couple things interesting. First of all, we have a whopping 12 people in the audience. And I commend you for being here. I'm kind of saddened with the magnitude of this issue that Dana Point seems to, you know, place on it, that we don't have a room full of people. And some of the people here are probably for the next item on the agenda. So I'm disappointed that maybe everybody downloaded it and read it online. I don't know. I found it interesting also that the locations that popped up as parking issues, which Chairman Nelson referenced, the town center wasn't one of them. They were kind of like residential neighborhoods. The one, Dana Hills, that makes sense with the high school, but...
Well, may I make a clarification on that? I meant the residential areas that came up. Obviously, Lantern District and Doheny were both important areas for concerns about parking.
Were they... I guess that's not the way I read this. I mean, obviously they are, but did they come up as being a problem? Did the residents provide that?
Well, there was a separate station for each of those those areas in the public workshops, so many problems and many ideas were noted on the maps for Doheny and Lantern District.
Okay, so because of their size, they were separated?
I kind of treated them separately.
Okay,
yes.
okay. I'm curious about the go-forward process. You have the recommendations of here's year one, here's year two. What's your vision as far as, let's say that council adopted your report and said, we want to follow Dr. Wilson's recommendations. Would it be your vision then that on a go-forward, parking committees subcommittees get established, and then they start chewing into the detail of each of the year one recommendations and what neighborhoods should be considered for permit parking or parking districts or whichever the issue is? Is that your vision?
Yeah, well, them supported by staff. So I think adopting this type of program would direct staff to assemble that technical committee, to dig into more results from the survey, and to begin framing ideas that can be brought to that committee.
Okay, so but it would be a combination of staff and that committee that would really be kind of driving the bus as far as priorities and so forth, unless they were given specific direction from council, let's say.
Yeah, I would say that the vision should come from Planning Commission and council.
Right.
And the charge would be framed by them. In terms of the tasks, I did year one and two almost as a framework, and the places and what appears in each one are a starting point. I think everybody needs to review it and see how they feel about what goes where. So it's more, the strongest recommendation I have is that you create some organization around this effort, and that you have yearly targets for what you're doing, and that you have reporting and transparency. What happens in year one and two, to me, is not as critical as setting up that process.
Okay, thank you. And that all sounds really well thought through, and my only concern would be that it, hopefully doesn't come out piecemeal. The parts don't come out piecemeal, and every other month, council's considering a new item relative to parking, that'd be kind of more comprehensively implemented, and that'll be a challenge given the magnitude of all the different things to look at and consider. But I greatly appreciate your effort on this. Thank you.
Great. Okay, we're going to open the public hearing. Do we have any speakers tonight? Thank you. Jim DeCarly.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. I'm Jim DeCarly, live at 34111 Blue Lantern Street, Dana Point. My neighbors have asked me to come here and address you tonight to express their concerns about the permit parking, and where Dr. Wilson had a scope for the entire city. I want to talk about just my block, west side. Blue Lantern is a divided street. We're concerned about what's happening on the west side of the street. The permit parking process, in our opinion, doesn't work there. From my house down, you have to have a permit to park, and that's from my house down to the Coast Highway, and that's about 7 or 8 properties. The 5 properties below me are street-to-street properties, and those people all live on Chula Vista, and they could care less about what goes on Blue Lantern, and just being good neighbors and cooperative with the city. When the city people came through and they said, we want to do this permit parking, they said, sure, why not? Sounds like a good idea. And I think my neighbors are suffering unintended consequences because of that. The houses above me, most of them don't have driveways. You have people, an adult family, they got children, adult children driving. So you have 3 and 4 cars, and so what's happening is the last guy coming home at night doesn't have a place to park. There's no place for visitors. You can't park below my house because you need a permit, and it's my understanding that if you don't live in the permit section, you're not entitled to a permit. So my neighbors can't get a permit for guests or for their overflow parking. So while seemingly it's a good idea to have permit parking so that you don't have all the people from the restaurants and what have you parking in the residential areas, it's just not working in our neighborhood. And there's really not a need for it, because from my house down, nobody ever parks there because there's no houses there. So that's a space where the people up above me that don't have driveways can park at night. They have a place, there's a place for guest parking. Personally, I have a problem with the permit parking because permit parking does not create any additional parking spaces. It limits parking. So it limits the owners of businesses in the Lantern District who have employees that need to park somewhere. They're between a rock and a hard spot. So I think you really need to look at that very carefully, which I'm pleased to see that you have professional help in here to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just a quick question to Seth. We don't have permit parking, do we? Oh, we do? In that neighborhood? Okay. Is that new? Okay. Richard Gardner.
Richard Gardner, and I shouldn't have had the coffee earlier.
We've got one more item after this, so you're welcome to come up for that too.
I've decided to cut myself off, you know, I have to. But I was going to suggest this to you, that whatever committee you do form, traffic or parking, that they become somewhat experts in the big picture in the long term. For instance, I read an interesting article that suggested that with the electric vehicles and the new batteries and with all the development that's occurring internationally in the world, especially in China and India for electric vehicles, that it's very likely that the three technologies, which will be the cell phones that are going to be very intelligent, the electric vehicles, and the, we'll call it a Uber effect, or that this whole way that we do things now of get in your car and drive somewhere and park it, that could go away. And it could be you walk outside and the electric vehicle, which has got artificial intelligence, takes you someplace. And the reason that it's going to happen is that it's going to cost you less. It'll be a cost. And then there was an analysis that said, how fast can this occur? 1 year, 2 years? If it costs you less to go out the front door and get into there's the vehicle, then you will just park your vehicle. You won't be using it. You'll take the easy, inexpensive way. So it starts to eliminate, what are you going to do with all these lanes? What about all these parking places? You don't have to look for them anymore. So it becomes now what do you do with your urban areas? Do you develop them? Do these extra lanes become, what do you landscape them? Are they bikes? What are we going to do? So the question becomes really interesting and complex, and it could happen by the year 2020. That's how soon the artificial intelligence, the smartphone apps, and the electric vehicles come together. Either way, you might want to be planning for electric charging areas and be very avant-garde regarding bicycle and other alternative transportation.
Thank you. Ma'am, did you want to speak? Just give us your name and where you're from.
My name is Carol Kelly. I do live in the Lantern District, and I did feel that the parking issue is very important. I participated in the workshop, and I am sorry some of my neighbors can't come, but I know a lot of people did read the report. The report was enormous. It was 12 pages. I think it was very complicated. I do not support the idea of having a parking oversight committee. We already have a traffic committee. We already have a financial review committee, and you get too many committees and nothing ever gets done. One thing I do agree with them, though, I think you do get, when you're going to a beauty salon, you shouldn't have the employees park right in front of the beauty salon because that takes the place of the customers. But having said that, we have an excellent trolley system. We should get some more vacant lots and uses and have employees of the new vendors park in the vacant lots, and then they take the trolley to the designated places with the customers. We need to do that now. We don't need more committees and more discussion. We need action. We should have had a parking plan originally. We never have. And what's happening in the Lantern District is everybody, you know, if there's meters or paid parking, they're just going to park into the overflow in the neighborhoods. And employees need to have a place to park. If they don't have a place provided by the restaurant or hotels, they're simply going to go in the neighborhoods, which they're doing now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other speakers? Give us your name and your address, please.
My name is Brett Johnson. I live at 33781 Malaga Drive in the Lantern District. And I just kind of wanted to second what the gentleman over there had said about future uses and things with technologies that are coming into place, just to invite the committee to kind of think about a not so distant future and possibilities, especially with the demographics within the Lantern District. It's majority on the younger side. They're more adept to taking advantage of these new technologies and vehicles. So I think that will self-correct just with society as it grows, especially as the Lantern District grows and all the commercial development. Also, I wanted to just kind of throw an idea out there to see if anyone's looked into public space that the city already owns and elevating the green space to the top of a parking structure. So from a visibility standard, anyone who lives on the hillsides, they're not looking down onto a parking structure, but they're looking onto a green space instead. And then building parking within city-owned property below, so it has a good aesthetic look from all the view properties, which should hopefully protect some values, but also provide an easier route as opposed to trying to get a developer to go in and build a parking structure that he can't charge fees to make his money back at this point in time, because we don't have the full development downtown done. So just wanted to throw those ideas out there. I think it's something that needs to be considered, and he's right. In about a 3 to 5 year period, you know, the way that we do and view transportation, and we have over the last 80 years, is going to change drastically, and I think we need to be have enough foresight to adapt that. And it's something that maybe the older demographics within our community haven't yet experienced or taken advantage of. But I think as everything gets polished, you will see the older demographics taking advantage of those uses too. So just wanted to lay that out there.
Great, thanks, Brent. Okay, we got one more, it looks like. Thank you. Robert, is it Orr?
Ewer.
Sorry, Ewer.
Hey, no problem. Toughest 3 letters you're going to hear tonight. Hey, thanks for the time. I want to address the Blue Lantern parking matter that Jim brought up earlier. I'm one of the folks that own one of the homes there, and I have a few tenants. I live a couple of doors down from Jim, and it wasn't like that when I bought the place a year and a half ago. So it was unusual to see that pop up. I didn't understand why, because as Jim said, I'm about 2 doors up the street from him. After his house, there's about 7 or 8 properties going down Blue Lantern towards the ocean. The land that is on the west side of that, the property owners, their front door and where they park is on Chula Vista. So these properties go all the way to Blue Lantern. I don't think there's, maybe one of them has even a steps down to Blue Lantern with a gate or something. So literally no access from the back of those properties up. So what has occurred, I think unintentionally, is this permit for Blue Lantern has created a space where nobody parks. Not even the people who maybe were intended to benefit from the permit. I wouldn't, you wouldn't. You would have to literally walk 3 blocks if you park down there up to get to Chula Vista. So I think it was unintended, perhaps. It would be great, we can leave the permitting, but perhaps allow the people who live on the street to utilize the parking space for the overflow and occasional guests and whatnot. That would be a really easy solution. So wanted to share that with you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. And I know we're not discussing permit parking tonight, so we can't take action on that, but I know I saw Matt feverishly taking notes over there, and I'm going to assume that he's going to take that to the appropriate person and address this potentially.
Thank you,
So,
that'd be wonderful.
Okay.
Blue Lantern.
thank you.
Take care.
Okay, with that, I will close the public hearing, bring it back to the commission for discussion and possible motion. Anybody want to lead off here? Because I will. Commissioner Opal.
One question that I have is, part of the recommended implementations by Mr. Wilson is that changing, and I apologize, getting my thoughts here, doing the timed parking in certain areas, especially in the Lantern District where we have that. But my understanding is that if that is because of the Measure H, if that's implemented, it needs to be citywide and cannot be specific to that area because of Measure H, unless it's voted upon.
So the town center plan is a land use document, but some of the parking regulations are through the municipal code. And so the municipal code is a separate standalone document. So similar to you regulate, I'm trying to think of a good hypothetical. The day trash is collected, that's not a good hypothetical, but first that popped to mind, that's standalone, separate from land use. So limiting the hours is possible. I think the biggest issue is the town center is within the coastal zone. And so anything that is done has to be consistent with the Coastal Act, which means you can't create any sort of preferential parking districts or regulations. It has to be accessible to everybody.
Great. Commissioner Donor.
I don't have a question. I have a recommendation. I move that we receive and approve the citywide parking project report and forward that report to the city council. And as part of that, I would also suggest the city council consider reconstituting the traffic committee. I think that was an excellent suggestion. We don't need 2 committees trying to do the same kind of thing.
So that would be, your motion would be to change the suggestion in the report to
reconstitute
the traffic committee. So
because I think
they do the whole thing.
What was proposed was representatives from different segments, which I think makes the most sense. And I don't know the total makeup of the existing traffic committee, but I would suggest it be considered that we merge them or reconstitute it.
Okay. Great.
Could
well, that's
I
a
interject
motion,
just
so
1 second just to clarify that the traffic committee is a standing committee right now, and I apologize because I don't have a lot of direct interaction with them. And so as opposed to reconstituting, I think what you're saying is expand their scope to cover the issues that were identified in the report.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to change the report. I mean, the report is what it is, and I'm recommending that we approve it and pass it to the city. Additionally, though, I think that the issue of having two committees focused on traffic is not very efficient. So I don't know how I would present that in a form of a motion, but I've coupled the two.
Okay, so you've got so there's a motion there. So I'll just second it so we can all discuss it. We don't have to take an action on it at the minute. Maybe we make a substitute motion, and I'll jump in here. So I have a couple comments. I think, after, reading all of this, I went through, I read this survey. If you haven't had an opportunity to read it, it's 40 pages. It's got some pretty interesting comments, some really great suggestions. It's clear to me that everybody is experiencing parking differently, and that their relationship with their car and their relationship with their parking space is certainly different than maybe their neighbors or mine. And, we're here trying to find a solution, because frankly, the Measure H issue. So this, I don't think would show up if it wasn't for Measure H and the parking plan that we did have. I think there was a comment that we didn't have a plan. We had a plan. We had a good plan, a plan that never got fully implemented because Measure H overturned that plan. I don't see a soul here from the Measure H group, which is sad. It's sad that a group has taken over control of the laws of the city, and then they don't show up when we're trying to fix the very problem that has been created as a result. So I also agree with Commissioner Donor. I think adding committees gets challenging, but I don't know that there's a simple solution. I don't know how much the traffic committee deals with parking, and my hope is that if we do end up with two committees, that the traffic committee deals with traffic, they don't deal with parking. Parking is, they're interrelated, but they're certainly not necessarily connected. So that's one comment. As it relates to the implementation plan, I have a couple other thoughts that I think our priorities need to be put in a little bit of a different, I wrote this down somewhere, I hope, because my memory is going, but I think the first thing that we need to do is, priority one is deal with the Lantern District and deal with the fallout of Measure H. We've got a situation that cannot be remedied without a vote of the people, and until we find a solution that gets enough votes, we have a significant investment in that area that is being underutilized and probably hurting the economics of the city. And so we need to focus, I think, first on the Lantern District and how we right that, what I would call a wrong. The second step would be probably appointing Brent to that parking commission, because I thought his ideas were good. I'm just kidding, by the way, but you should certainly put your name in the hat if that does move forward. Then we can start talking about how we address the issues in Doheny. It sounds like we're on track there with the form-based code. And then look at a citywide parking solution, because I think up until Measure H, we didn't have a citywide parking problem. Now we do. We saw it. Sorry, ma'am. This is a public hearing, so no outbursts. The city parking issue should be resolved last but not least. It's something that needs to be addressed, but the biggest issue we have today facing this city is the Lantern District. So I would substitute the motion that we adjust the priorities in that list, or at least recommend that, and then also recommend that if the Transportation Committee does not take up parking, that we then form that committee.
Yeah, my concern was that you're going to use city staff. They're going to have to support both committees, so you're increasing the workload for city staff, and we're talking about a funding issue, and so that's my concern. But
Can I weigh in on that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a second. So we're discussing the motion and your position on that, and I made a substitute motion. I think that's the proper way to do it, right?
Okay, I'll second your substitute motion.
Is that the right way to do it?
So now we're talking about the substitute motion.
Okay.
As soon as you say that, I'm going to talk about whatever I want to.
Well, let's be honest, they're pretty similar.
So with respect to, I agree that effort should be concentrated and focused first and foremost on Lantern District, but also as Doheny Village is marching forward in conjunction with that effort, but that's a little bit self-contained. With respect to the subcommittee issue, my understanding is that the traffic committee meets only like once every 6 months, if I'm not mistaken. Does anybody know?
They're scheduled to meet monthly.
Okay, but I think they cancel a lot. Shane is shaking her head yes.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. I don't have much interaction with them either. I know at times they've met more frequently than every 6 months. I don't know.
I think their agenda is driven by the work that's presented to them, so.
Right, it's a kind of on-demand, they're
Correct.
kind of on call to come and study something. Dr. Wilson has, and I'll be perfectly honest, I don't know the makeup of the traffic subcommittee. I don't know who's on it. I don't know their expertise and so forth. Dr. Wilson's thoroughly studied our issue and has made specific suggestions which could be altered But as to representing various stakeholders that have an interest in and should weigh in on the parking issue. If this parking report gets adopted and moved forward on all these fronts, this in and of itself is going to be a very large and expensive effort. And I'm sure that, I think probably before it goes to council, there needs to be some kind of financial impact linked to that, rather than just adopting some kind of report in a vacuum without understanding the financial impact. But my point is that the parking committee, I think, parking's a huge issue in town and needs to be thoroughly studied. And so there should be careful thought as to which parties or stakeholders are on that parking committee. And just to say, okay, well, the traffic subcommittee can do it, those might not be the right stakeholders and the right, with the right level of expertise or weighing in on the, like I thought the Chamber of Commerce representative was a great idea on the parking. I have no idea if there's a Chamber of Commerce person on the traffic. So anyway, I'm belaboring the point.
Would you restate your?
Yeah, so my substitute motion was that we move forward with a recommendation. Excuse me, rethink, how did I say it? Where, we prioritize the areas, Lantern District, Doheny Village, citywide, and that if the Transportation Committee isn't responsible for parking already, that we leave that alone and we institute this as proposed.
How about I withdraw my motion and we start again?
Works for me. Yeah.
If I understand what you're saying is that we need to, my point is we want to put the report forward to the city council. And with the issue of the Lantern District, because we can't adopt a citywide program without addressing the issues from Proposition H.
Right.
Is that correct? So we're passing the report on with a recommendation that the city council focus on the town center plan, a town center plan, which is not compatible with this point with the vision that's being proposed in this parking plan. Is that?
That we alter the implementation focus and we put Lantern District at the top of that list. That would be the one change to the report, and then everything else kind of rolls forward. And that in our approval and forwarding to the city council, that we ensure that they look at the traffic committee, and if the traffic committee is not the right committee, and we ultimately this is a policy issue, that they institute the committee as proposed by Dr. Wilson in here.
So the motion would be to approve the report with two additional recommendations. One, that the Lantern District be number one priority, and number two, a traffic committee be established. I mean, a parking committee.
Parking committee, that it be established if the Transportation Committee isn't already actively dealing with looking at our parking. If they're not doing that now, it's not something that we should add to their list. I actually, when you look at what Dr. Wilson proposed, the different people that would be on this committee, I mean, it's a nice cross-section of all the interested parties.
I think the stakeholders are identified well, and so I don't know that that would be replicated with the traffic, and I would keep that separate then.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would be the motion.
All right, you read that back? Only kidding.
I can do it if you want me to.
You got that?
Yeah, the motion.
That's my motion. Your second.
Second.
Okay. And then we can continue a discussion.
Now discussion.
What do you think about, I mean, kind of glaringly absent from that list of potential people on is someone from the city council?
I believe they're in there, aren't they?
No.
Oh.
There's a list.
I saw them on there.
Page 5.
I'm missing page 5.
Here.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I would actually, quick question for Dr. Wilson. Is there a reason we wouldn't want a city council member participating on that?
No, my only assumption was that this committee is reporting to them.
Okay. Got it. Okay. I mean, it's certainly an interesting question is whether we include a city council member on the committee. I don't think it's a bad idea. Do we have a city council member on the Doheny Village Plan by any chance? On that, the subcommittee that was put together?
Well, on the kind of form-based code subcommittee, we had two.
We've had Mueller.
Yeah, we had Mueller and Tomlinson. I mean, I just think that they're the ones that are really going to be ultimately, more definitive on this issue, and to the extent that they can liaison back and forth issues and priorities and weigh in. And I mean, I think their insight's valuable rather than someone. I think they should be invited, but.
Is there any reason, Madam City Attorney, that they couldn't be on that committee?
Nope, no reason.
Okay.
They can be on it if they want to, or if you would recommend that to them.
Obviously, we make this recommendation, they don't have to actually act. Okay. Commissioner Murphy, did you have any comments? I know I saw you raise your hand over there. And
Yeah, I did, and I lost it. Because you guys are so riveting. Listen to you. Well, I just want to make a comment that I take this gentleman's statements to heart, and I think we have to be very careful to be inclusive with, when we make a proposal to the city council. We need to be inclusive in terms of not only who's on it, but what group they come from, what they have to offer. So we can be really intuitive as to, I mean, he's probably knows a heck of a lot more. I know he knows a heck of a lot more than I do, so, about these issues. So I'd like to see maybe, I don't know how many number would be appropriate to be on this committee. We might have to expand it a little.
so are you suggesting a amended motion that has a number of committee members? And do you know what that is?
Yes, I think, because this is a very multitasking job, and we need to hear from the folks that know.
Do you know what, so I guess the question would be, what would be your suggestion? So I'm open to amending my motion to address what you're saying about, do you have a specific amount of like number or something? Mike, turn your mic on.
When you expand a committee, you're going to have everyone that needs a chance to speak. So I think you might be better off to keep the committee as small, 5 or 6 members, and then invite the experts and the public to participate in the committee without making a 15-member committee that's going to be more unwielding to manage.
Yes, that's always a possibility. I just.
Is your mic on?
Thinking in terms of other councils and that I have been on, and when you have issues that are multifaceted, sometimes it's more productive to have more people involved.
Like Congress, is what you're saying.
Oh, yeah, that would have been my, yeah, no, that's not my suggestion.
I'm just kidding, sorry.
Because then you get, I mean, you can take 5 people and not get the same results, possibly, that you could get from 10 people, from different areas and different strengths and different knowledge pools. So I just don't know if we want to keep it at 5.
What, would 7 suffice?
Well, these are arbitrary.
Yeah, I mean,
numbers.
that's, I guess, where the question that I would have is, what's the right number, and how do we get to that so that we can move this to the council with our recommendation? So if it's to increase that committee to X, you know, what was recommended was a very specific.
Stipulation where, okay, we increase it to 7 with the stipulation that if the city council feels as they go along, they should add on to it. Then that's a possibility.
Another possible alternative to that would be not to come up with a specific number, but a recommendation that the city council consider expanding the number of people on the committee if they feel it's appropriate.
As they go along.
So that,
Just so they know they're not prohibited from expanding. If we send them up a number and they think that's locked in, then they.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would be comfortable amending my motion to include the language of Madam City Attorney, which is that the city council consider as part of our recommendation, adding more members to that committee to have a broader range of stakeholders. That way, we're not stuck trying to figure out what that is. They have the ability to do that.
Yeah, broader array of stakeholders and sensibilities and whatever they have to bring to the table.
Right, okay. So I would amend my motion to reflect that. Would you second that?
Second.
Okay, great.
and I'm just
now-
going to repeat the motion right now so that we have a clear record. As the way I understand it, effectively, your motion is to approve the report and forward to the city council with the following modifications. Number 1, priorities would be in the order of Lantern District, Doheny Village, and then the citywide parking issue. Number 2, the committees would be organized as recommended by Dr. Wilson unless the traffic subcommittee is already looking at the parking issue, and if so, have the traffic subcommittee continue to look at parking issues. And then number 3, that the city council consider expanding the number of individuals who are on the committee to reflect a broader range of stakeholders.
That's how I remember it. Thank you. Commissioner, Vice Chair.
Thank you. So your motion says parking goes to the traffic subcommittee if they're already reviewing it, but if not?
Then we form the committee as noted in here with the council considering adding more members to it as they see fit with a
Okay.
broader range of.
I guess I'd kind of like to hear what Dr. Wilson has to, how strongly he feels about, kind of the groups that are represented here, because that would be, if they just went to the traffic subcommittee, we have no idea. How important is the kind of the source of the people to his envisioned parking committee? Can we ask him that?
Yeah, please, would you mind coming up and answering a few questions?
Do you understand the question?
I think my primary recommendation is that there be a committee charged with this, so there's a champion to keep this issue moving. Parking issues and traffic are somewhat related in that one of the comments in neighborhoods was people speeding and people felt difficulty backing out of their driveway. So there is kind of a logical connection. But I do feel that group of stakeholders is a pretty good starting point for getting the diversity of it. I really think the opportunity for working with the chamber and perhaps other business groups is important in the Lantern District especially. Whether or not the 2 representatives from the city committees are essential, I'm not sure. I'd leave that up to you and the council and the staff to recommend. But I think you definitely want the private sector and the public city departments represented on the technical committee, and then the different stakeholders represented in the parking committee if you have one.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And we don't know what the makeup of the transportation committee is, right? Okay. Commissioner Donor?
Call for the question.
Call for the question. We got to do it, right? If you call for the question, any more discussion?
My discussion point would be, you're leaning towards throwing it, your motion envisions the traffic committee primarily, and
No, my motion is that to not have too many committees. I actually agree with Commissioner Donor that a knee-jerk response to situations like the one we're in is to regulate and to study, and we've got committees that are already set up, like a planning commission. So,
Right.
you know, if I step back one more step, what I wouldn't want to have is another committee that was reviewing site plans before
Right.
it came to the planning commission.
Right, and-
Because that's what we do.
Right.
I think what Commissioner Donor was suggesting, which I think is a good one, is, and what my motion suggests, is if the Transportation Commission is already focused on parking as one of their primary jobs, then we should leave it there.
Okay.
If they're not, then we should form the committee as outlined in Dr. Wilson's report, with the one amendment being that the council look at potentially adding more stakeholders to that if the need for a broader range of participants is decided on. That is kind of the crux of what
Okay.
I'm in support of, is that we don't over-study this.
Right.
We don't need two committees doing the same thing, I guess.
Right.
So, and I think that's in line with what you were saying. Yep. Okay. All right, so we ready to vote? All right, let's vote. Okay, that carries 5-0. Thank you very much, Dr. Wilson. I hope if I get one of your books, I can get you to sign it. Okay, moving on. We have one more item, I believe. And thank you to the commission and staff for a good discussion on the parking issue. It's a very important topic, I think, for all of us. Item 4 is preliminary review PA 16-01204, the development of 2 legal lots with 5 detached multifamily dwelling units that will require entitlements, including a tentative tract map, site development permit, and multiple variance requests located at 25022 and 25032 Selva Road. Do we have a staff report?
Yes, Associate Planner Danny Giamatti is going to lead our presentation. Giametti, sorry.
Totally fine. Thank you for the introduction, and good evening, Chairman Nelson, fellow commissioners. Tonight's topic is a preliminary review for the development of 2 legal lots with 5 detached multiple family dwelling units that require entitlements, including applicant requests for variances located at 25022 and 25032 Selva Road. So the site consists of 2 vacant parcels located at the southern corner of Selva Road and Calle La Primavera. When combined, they create a 16,426 square foot lot. For purposes of this project and the presentation, both sites will be considered as one lot. The corner lot creates a rectangle and is bordered by existing multiple family development to the south and to the west. The subject site is located in the residential multifamily 14, RMF 14 zoning district on the city's zoning map, and pursuant to the zoning code prescribed minimum land area per unit, the proposed site is large enough to support up to 6 residential units. So staff reviewed and provided comments to the applicant on various designs for the subject site, and initially the project proposed 6 units, but it has since been reduced down to 5. Because of the topographic limitations of the site and the applicant's proposed deviations from the zoning code, staff recommended a preliminary review by Planning Commission, which is a more formal option made available to the applicant as opposed to an informal staff level review. Through this process, staff reviews and provides a brief summary of the project and applicant requests to the Planning Commission. Additionally, the applicant's given an opportunity to present a proposal directly to and answer questions of the Planning Commission. Pursuant to section 9.61.100 of the Dana Point Zoning Code, the Planning Commission is legally limited in the type of an amount of input they can provide at this level. Typically, comments are focused on the identification of potential issues, which may be raised during consideration of a formal submittal, and general feedback on how key issues or policies might apply to the project may also be provided at this time. The project proposes to develop the subject site as 5 detached residential units, each with an attached 2-car garage. 1 4-bedroom, 3.5-bath unit and 4 3-bedroom, 2.5-bath units with total living areas ranging from roughly 2,000 to about 2,400 square feet are proposed. All units are designed with 3 stories, utilizing a split-level design and include their own private open space areas. There's a total of 10 covered and 4 uncovered parking stalls, which are required for this project. All required parking is provided on site in inside a separate attached 2-car garage for each individual unit, and there is uncovered visitor parking stalls, which are located along the shared private driveway. The existing lot is not steep enough to qualify for our hillside condition ordinance, which requires a minimum 20% average slope per our zoning code. Construction of homes on this site without deviations from the prescribed development standards could result in an unfavorable design, as the homes would sit below the street level and require steep driveway grades. Allowing for deviation in height and story count could provide a design that is compatible to both the south and west bordering properties, which consist of both 3-story multiple unit developments. The one to the west being a 4-unit site, and the one to the south being a 3-unit site. Additionally, in order to create building paths for all proposed structures, pedestrian access, and appropriate driveway grades to the garages, significant cut and fill of the existing slope is going to be necessary. Due to the significant grading, several high retaining walls will be necessary to support not only the proposed improvements on site, but the existing improvements off site. So the applicant has provided the commission with a justification statement for variance requests, which you've received in your packet. This letter requests that the Planning Commission provide feedback on the proposed project, including requests for deviations from the following prescribed zoning requirements: the maximum height measurement and story count, a reduction in the front and rear setbacks, and the minimum building separation requirement. First is the height and story variance. The building height section of the zoning code limits residential structures' heights based on roof pitches. The most updated plan that we received identifies that there are multiple lower roof pitches which limit the height to a maximum of 24 feet. And as you can see, it's a little small in the plan, but it's 2.5 12. So less than 3/12 requires a height limit of no more than 24 feet. Therefore, the proposed units are 3 stories and exceed the maximum allowable building height, with the tallest unit standing at a maximum of 40 feet, and that would be the unit in the very back of the lot. Although the applicant is defining the lowest floor as the basement because it is partially underground, it does not comply with the DPZC, Dana Point Zoning Code definition. As defined, a basement is a living or storage area which is constructed wholly underground, meaning below the exterior finished grade on all sides. However, due to the steep topography of the site, the units will appear as 2-story structures from both Selva Road and Calle La Primavera, and they will be roughly 28 feet as measured from the street to the top of the ridge. The applicant suggests that to comply with the established maximum building height, which requires that each structure be measured from lowest existing grade or finished pad, whichever is lower per our code, would create a practical difficulty or unnecessary physical hardship, as the proposed height increase is only required to offset a large elevation change of the lot. And then a deviation from the height limit, the height limit and then the 2-story maximum requirement and roof pitch requirement would be necessary in order for the applicant to proceed with the plans as you see in front of you proposed today. Oops, back one. So the second request is that the project proposes patios, which are highlighted in yellow on this image, which encroach into the required 20-foot front and 15-foot rear yard setbacks, which are highlighted in purple. If the patios are proposed to exceed 30 inches above grade per our code, a reduction in these setbacks would be necessary. Additionally, the zoning code states that on corner lots where one street is of higher classification than the other, the lot line fronting the street with the lower classification shall be the front lot line. Although the most recent design complies with the zoning code method for determining which lot line is in the front, that being Calle La Primavera, the initial design identified the front lot line along Selva Road. Per the provided justification letter, the applicant is requesting that Planning Commission provide feedback on locating the front lot line and the respective front yard setback, possibly along Selva Road. And lastly, the minimum building separation variance is the request from the applicant. The RMF 14 zoning district requires a minimum 10-foot building separation, which is prescribed, as I said, per the code, between primary and accessory buildings on the same lot. The applicant is requesting a 4-foot reduction in the prescribed 10-foot minimum building separation to a distance of a max minimum of 6 feet between units 1 and 2, and 6 feet between units 2 and 3. These distances are also identified here on the plan in red. So the applicant is here as well to provide a brief presentation, and we also have a rendering which will be played on the next slide that kind of gives you a better idea of the project. And staff requests that the Planning Commission review the subject proposal and provide the applicant with comments and feedback in moving forward with a formal discretionary application submittal. This concludes my presentation, and as always, let me know if there are any questions. And if I go to the next slide here, see if I can get this to load. May or may not play, so. Get anything? I guess not. Oh, there we go. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the slide. Well, the video doesn't look like it's playing, but I do have the renderings here, which you've also been provided on a hard copy. This would be from Selva Road as you turn onto Calle La Primavera. And then this would be the driveway entry off of Calle La Primavera.
Can you go back one?
Yeah,
just
no
real
problem.
quickly?
This one here?
No, the next one, the first one. So this is the view from Selva.
From Selva before you turn onto Calle La Primavera to go south, correct?
Okay.
And then this is the driveway entry off of Calle La Primavera, shared driveway. This is a close-up of that again. Another image from there. Close-up of that image. And this is again on Selva Road. I believe this is Selva Road as well. And obviously this is the topography of the slope. So again, this concludes my presentation. I'm here to answer any questions, and the applicant will be providing a brief presentation as well.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. Any questions for staff before the applicant does his presentation? You can always get back to him afterwards. Okay.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Niles Tanakatsubo. I'm the architect for the project. The client, my client, the developer, Jesse Mullen, could not be here this evening. He ate in an establishment, not at Dana Point, and maybe either had a bug before he ate there or got food poisoning, so he's been in bed all day. So he apologizes for not being here this evening. As our firm is finding, there are no easy sites left anywhere anymore. Throughout this area and where my firm is located in Northern California, the only sites that are left are the ones that nobody wanted to touch and still don't want to touch, or are very, very difficult, or have lots of very difficult pre-existing conditions. So, and this site is one of them. We did start the project thinking that we could establish determine the 20-foot setback off of Selva Road. It was a busier street, and we thought that was more appropriate. And we had designed a project that had 6 homes. And the reason why we're choosing homes as opposed to multifamily attached flats, duplexes, is because of the issues that I heard earlier this evening that occurs in neighborhoods. And so what we've been doing in the last 8 years or so is we've been taking these small infill lots, and even though we could put a more economical architectural building type of soft garages with flats on top, and it's much easier for us to maximize the density, we've created these smaller pocket homes that they're really not very big. They're only about 21 feet wide and about 42 to 45 feet long. So they're really almost like townhomes, but we separate them for all the benefits that separating housing can do. We don't have a problem now with neighbors and sound transmission. We have people who seem to have a much higher level of investment entitlement into the home that they purchase in the project because it's a home and it's separated. I mean, it's amazing what 6 feet can do between two properties in terms of people taking ownership of what they have. And there's less of an attitude of, well, let the others worry about it. You know, I've got my little flat, and I'm not going to worry about the common area. So we try to create as much common area and attached to these smaller homes so that people have ownership of more than just their air envelope. And we also want to make sure we don't create a situation where somebody doesn't take care of their home, expecting the mini condominium association to take care of it for them. So, so to that end, we have been very successful in creating these smaller homes, which resonate very well with people who buy them, and we consider them a much a more favorable asset to the community than typical multifamily projects. So in terms of this particular project, so we then, after almost over a year working with staff, we submitted a 6-home plan last year about, I think it was October or September, and that's when we discovered that we had chosen the wrong street as our front setback. And we couldn't use Selva, we had to use Primavera in the process. Then we decided we could rework it so that we would have fewer homes and present a more cohesive 2-story element all the way along the street. So as you can see from our street elevations, we really only present 2-story elevations for the 4 homes across the street. So the issue of 3 stories, so maybe we should go right to the issues of the height and story variance. Danny, if you wouldn't mind the next slide. The height variance is a request because this site, it doesn't qualify for your 20% hillside ordinance, but we have areas of the site that are generally around 17%, which is very close to 20. And we have some areas that actually have 40% slope along the west property line, or east property line rather. And so the site has got all kinds of interesting grading issues. Now, one of the things that we wanted to avoid by doing these smaller homes was to avoid, and this is not to denigrate our neighbors next door, but we didn't want to create a massive structure that would be 3 stories of retaining walls and having a residential unit sitting on top with a mansard roof because of the height limitations of going to the top of ridge. You know, so we didn't want to create a box with a cap, you know, a Pizza Hut sort of image. Not to denigrate Pizza Huts either, but you know, unfortunately, when you say that name, you kind of immediately think about the box and the hat. So my little diagram to the side of that really shows the interesting issues of really what should be the 29-foot height. You can actually take different places along the perimeter of our home, and you could reasonably argue that that could be the height. And because of the interesting topography of this remaining site, I don't think that it really creates a precedent for other sites because I'm not sure that there are very many sites that present this kind of a steep topography that are just below the 20% hillside or zoning. In terms of stories, all of our basements are basically underground. Yes, there are some areas that are exposed, and so according to the ordinance, it would be counted as a story. However, if we removed every basement on every one of the homes, the exterior appearance of our homes would not change one iota. The grade and the wall that would come down to hit grade would remain exactly the same. So whether there's a basement behind it or not, you would never know the difference. So really, the specific meeting the ordinance of stories and where stories are counted from, because we put a basement in, is really impacts our project. And we are putting basements in because we are going to end up going quite deep with our foundations and our retaining walls, even if we don't have basements to deal with the topography of the site. So Given that these aren't very large homes to begin with, it's an amenity that we can provide to the future homeowners. And one of the problems that does occur where people use their two-car garage as a one-car storage and one-car storage for all the other stuff that they don't have room for. We hope to give them a basement. They can put everything in a basement and use the 2 cars in the garage to park their vehicles. So any smaller homes that are 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath or so, or 3.5 bath, there's always one more room that you really need besides that 3rd bedroom. And by creating a basement for all these homes, we can alleviate the problem that often happens with people using a garage space for storage. So this diagram kind of illustrates the storage variance where this is home number 4, which is to the left of the driveway. And this is looking from their driveway, and you can see the driveway sloping down to the garage. The garage is split level from the living floor to the left. And you can see that we have a basement. Now, if we remove the basement, it will not change the view of this side of the house at all. It will still look exactly the same. So we're asking that a variance for how we count stories, because we've worked very diligently to never present more than a 2-story elevation on these homes. So we don't ever stack three stories ever. It's always 2 stories, and the 3rd story really comes from the basement. So, but by removing the basement, it doesn't change how our homes are looking, or doesn't change the look of our homes to any degree. In terms of the front and rear setbacks, the preliminary nature of the design and the drawings made it hard for staff to really determine that for the 2 homes along Primavera, we do not have the patios that are higher than 30 inches above grade. So according to the ordinance and design guidelines, we can extend the patio to the property line, but we're only extending it 10 feet into the 20-foot setback to provide a patio for those 2 homes. So we believe that in this regard, in the front setback along Primavera, we have no need for a variance. Along the rear setback, we have a slightly different request in that we have a pretty deep setback along the side. And I'm sorry, Dan, I think I have another slide with the rear property line. Yes, there we go. Thank you. So along the rear property line, that to the left is Selva Road, we would end up having a retaining wall to probably some degree, as shown here, in that rear setback because of the severity of the grades along that property line. So what we've done is we've created an elevated patio in both of those homes that on the left-hand side are just about even with grade at that point, but because of the severity of the grade, it ends up becoming a rather high wall as it moves downhill. And we could drop the patio to a much lower level, but in doing so, we'd have a 8 or 9 foot retaining wall on the left, basically a hole that would serve as a patio, and then as we move to the right, the wall would get smaller until it got to the end and be almost a grade. So in either case, we would be creating a pretty tall retaining wall. And in doing so, but by placing it in our position here, we cover the basement. So our basement is buried along this side of the rear property line, as opposed to it being exposed and having a large retaining wall. And again, even if we remove the basement, we would still need a wall that high in order to support the floor above. That comes off the street. And finally, we should talk about the minimum building separation. We could combine homes 1 and 2. Those are the 2 homes to the right here. Selva Road is right below on the diagram. We could put those 2 homes together, and then we could create a larger distance between homes 2 and 3. But again, in doing so, we would meet the intent of the code of 10 feet between buildings. And we pointed out to staff early on that if we are going to be subject to a very prescriptive reading of where the front property line is going to be, then a very prescriptive reading of the ordinance talks about main building to accessory building. And we don't have any accessory buildings, we're all main buildings. So we thought it was perfectly reasonable to not set a precedent by pointing that out and saying that we could put less than 10 feet between buildings because of the constraints of the site, the geometry, the angle of it. I think there's one right angle on this property line, on this property. All the rest are curves and funny angles and non-parallel lines. So by separating these buildings, we then are able to reduce the massing. We have a much more desirable housing unit for folks because they're not attached by a common wall. And especially with homes 2 and 3, because the angle of the home turning the corner, we have only 2 places where it's less than 6 feet, and then it gets wider than that. So we thought that the trade-offs would be much more beneficial if we could have this very minor request for 3 feet to the property line and 3 feet to the property line for a total of 6 feet between buildings. Early on, when we had talked to staff about this, when we first came in, staff thought there was a building code issue as to why it was 10 feet. They referred our request to the building official at the time, and the building official had no issues with our separation being 6 feet between buildings. Because the building code does allow a separation of 3 feet from the face of the building to the property line, so you can put windows in the building, and they don't have to be protected. And by doing the separation, we're able to put windows in offset between one home and the other, so that you don't have situations where people are asking for toilet paper off the bathroom to the house next door. And we can put windows up higher where they're not really looking at each other, but we are able to bring light into rooms that would normally not have a window on that side. So having done this type of home in 3 other projects, one of the comments we get is how much light comes into these very small homes. So with that said, I'm happy to take any questions or listen to any comments you may have, and should you close the public session, I'd be more than happy to have you open it up again so I can come back and answer any questions you may have or address any comments.
We're not making, is this a public hearing?
This is not a public hearing. Public is allowed to comment, but not technically a public hearing.
Okay, great.
All right, thank
So if any of the commissioners have questions of the applicant, this would be a good time to have them then. So I have a couple questions. What is the rear setback requirement that you're asking for relief from? Do you know?
The rear setback requirement is 15 feet, and we're encroaching into the rear setback 10 feet to create a meaningful patio. And
5 feet on that patio.
yes.
Is there anything
Now-
above it?
I'm sorry.
Is there anything above that?
No, there was nothing above that. It is completely open. The homes as they front onto Selva, we're not requesting any variance or we're not encroaching on the 10-foot setback at that point because of the proximity of the street at that point. And we also, because of the way the property line works and the geometry of the site, we are setting the houses back from each other. Home number 1 on the right, the rectangle in front of it is the open patio. Home number 2 to the left, that's the actual face of the home, and this patio is to the left of it. So we're jogged those 2 facades of the homes by over 12 feet, in addition to separating it by 6 feet. Dan, could you go to the next slide? I think we've got...
And real quick, Chairman Nelson, can I clarify the variance? This is more of a variance clarification. It's the variance request is actually for a reduction in the projection allowance of the patio areas pursuant to our zoning code. The projection section it states that certain patios that project over 30 inches in height cannot project into any required yard setbacks. So this is more of a projection variance based on what the most recent iteration of the plans show.
Okay. Great, thank you. I think that was the only question that I had.
And then Niles, did you?
Yeah, if you can go to the next slide. Okay. Just more images of the homes along Selva. And I think the image to the left illustrates the separation between the two homes, and I would argue that increasing it to 10 feet really isn't going to make any appreciable difference in how those two homes are presenting to the street. And you can see on the slide to the right, the image on the right, that the two homes along Selva are not only separated, but they're also sawtooth. One home is set back more than 12 feet from the other home. So it's not a massive two-story structure that's attached and facing the street.
Is there a gate or a fence in between these homes? Where
Yes,
there's
there-
a 6 foot, so you have a 3 foot side yard with a fence in between that, so
Yes,
you're
that
like
is
2.5 feet of actual space?
Yes.
Okay. You think anybody can get through there?
For maintenance purposes, it's not something where you're going to be able to hang out, but
Okay, so it's not usable site, it's just,
not from a recreational
Okay.
point, no.
I'm good. Okay, I'll just jump in, because I think what we're gonna do is give you our feedback, couple, some thoughts. We're not allowed to tell you much more than that, I think. So we don't do a lot of these very often, but what I'd say is a couple things. One, earlier tonight you witnessed a neighborhood that's very passionate about their neighborhood, and I could only imagine if a project that came before that neighborhood with the amount of variances that were being requested, how that would have gone. Probably not as well as it did for that applicant. I know that we've had several projects in this neighborhood with similar situations. Not too long ago, I think we had a code enforcement issue. We had the exact same situation, and that gentleman who was using what was supposed to be not a basement, but a crawl space utility, had converted into a usable space, and then came back and asked for the variance that was denied. So I'm concerned with the height variances in this area. I'm concerned with the idea that a single-family development with a bunch of variances is more appropriate than maybe a full multifamily development that meets the development standards. It's a tough one, but 3-foot separation. I mean, even if it was single-family homes, you get 4 in between each, so you get a total of 8 feet. I think as our code is minimum 4 feet in the RS zone. Do you know by any chance?
Sorry, in the RD 14,
Yeah.
that's the side. In this particular zone, RMF.
It's 10.
It's 10 on the street and 5 on the interior side.
Interior,
Yeah.
okay, so we're reducing that down to 6 under the request. Got it. So I guess those would be my comments. I think it's a good design. It's nice looking. The architecture seems nice. I think as it presents on the street, with the sloped roof going up, which makes this appear a lot taller than the majority of it, I think that may be deceptive and hard for the general public to get. So I don't know I don't know what's in there. The plans don't give us enough information as to what's inside that space. But if it's volume, I would probably take a look at that if it's not necessary. Those are the things that come off the top of my head. Variances are hard to get in this town for a lot of reasons. It's a difficult site. You said it. The easy ones are gone. The hard ones are left. And sometimes the hard ones stick around for a long time until the owners deal with the pricing issues and some of the economic issues that come with development. And I'm sympathetic to the issues, but I would take a look at any of the variances that are proposed and would, variances you really make your justification, make sure it's solid and on solid ground. And that's kind of the comments that I have tonight.
I have a number of questions. I'm going to direct them to staff, but if staff defers to Miles to answer, that's perfectly fine with me, so don't go anywhere. I like the design. I'm very familiar with the site. It is very challenging. On the plan, it appears that the right-of-way line is a little bit funky relative to improvements. There's what looks like a back of walk line not coincident with the right-of-way line. Is that accurate? What, or what's the, let's assume that the right-of-way line is correct. What is the other line then, on Selva in particular?
Well, actually, I could answer that because before we, our client took control of the property, we went through a very extensive title search to verify what was happening here. So what happened from the title report was that there was an easement along Selva that was granted to the city.
Okay.
But that easement was abandoned by the city. But before that happened, the city had extended or had built the sidewalk, the rather wide sidewalk, and located the curb and infrastructure along that property line, assuming that they were in their easement. But when they abandoned the easement, they did not cut the sidewalk back and to the new property line. They just
So the sidewalk encroaches onto the private property?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So those lines are in fact correct, accurate?
Are correct, according to the boundary topographic survey and done by our civil engineer, as well as the title search done prior to the control of the property.
Okay, great. How high are the tallest retaining walls then?
We have
Approximately.
approximately. I think the tallest one is there in the image on the lower left-hand corner of the site plan. I think that's the tallest one there. It's about, so you count the lines. I think it's 1, 2, 3.
I counted them. It's about 9 or 10 feet?
Yeah, about 9 or 10 feet. That is where, that slope is about 40%. That is a really steep slope at that corner of the site.
Okay, and if that patio was not allowed to be there, then there would just be the straight facade of the home in that, which would be that height?
That's correct.
Okay.
So part of why we placed the patio there was to create different layers of massing along that property line, so there wouldn't just be this plain
Okay.
wall that just went straight up from grade.
If this was before me for approval, I'd probably have a lot more questions and request some images of what is on the other side, what looks at that, what elevation is it at, and so forth, for additional information. How, Danny or Kurth, is the height measured? Is it measured? I mean, we had a presentation from John Tilton about height, but how is it? Is it measured from like the finished floor?
It's measured from the finished pad or existing grade, in this case, whichever is lower. So because they're proposing a cut along Selva Road, then it would establish a lower pad height, or a lower height than what the existing grade would be. So we'd take it from that lowest finished pad. The same goes for along, even though if they're proposing to utilize the existing grade, if they were, then we'd take that from wherever that low structure point would be to the top of ridge.
On a per structure, so this site would have 5
Correct.
different starting points?
Because the structures are detached, they're measured independently.
Okay, great. How would things have changed if this, keep referencing it's only 17%, if it was over 20%? Would that have made it a lot easier for the applicant to develop? A different set of requirements that allow more?
It may have. If it was over 20%, there would be an allowance to increase the height, I believe up to a maximum of 33 feet. If the roof pitch was prescribed, or if it was proposed at 6/12 or greater, and then shorter thereafter based on roof pitch. And they'd be allowed to also go up to 3 stories. However, there are certain requirements in the ordinance as well, one of which is to require that they're limited in a floor to area ratio, which our normal residential structures are not. But if you utilize the hillside ordinance, there's an FAR of 0.75, so meaning 0.7, so 75% of the lot would be your maximum floor to area ratio. In addition to that, they'd be required to provide relief at upper stories. The second story would be provided to, would be required to provide a square footage offset, I believe is what it's called. I want to chime in if so, of the linear length of the structure, and you'd multiply that times 5 So whatever that square footage is, you'd have to provide relief or undulation on the second floor. And then the third floor would be 10 feet. So you take 10 times, let's say if it was 40, then it would be 400 square feet. So you would have to provide, they don't have to create a cake, a layer cake design. We ask that there be relief in different locations. You may remember the project that was approved last year on Calle La Primavera, a little further down across from the church. Both of those homes, there was 2 homes side by side, single family, but they utilized the hillside ordinance as they had a slope that was, I think, around 50%. It's very steep. Whereas this particular property, yes, they have topographical challenges indeed, but based on the survey and the images that we've been able to get information from, the percentage is probably, I want to say anywhere between 16 and 19%.
Okay, thank you. Are patios allowed in the front setback? Is the answer yes, but not if they're over 30 inches above grade?
Correct. So if the patio, we would call it a deck per our projection requirements. Decks are not allowed to project into required yard setbacks if they exceed 30 inches in height. If they're under 30 inches in height, then they can project to the property line.
What if it was just a slab-on-grade patio?
Slab-on-grade patio, and it continued less than 30 inches along existing grade, then it could technically go to the property line. Correct.
So could you build some retaining walls and have it be a slab-on-grade patio rather than ask us for a variance?
Yeah, with the variance we're asking for is only the rear property line patios, not the front property line patios.
That is correct. Initially in our review, we thought that the variance, one of the variance requests was for a relief from the projection requirement in the front yard. And then in seeing the latest iteration of plans, they identify, and with speaking with Niles, the patios that are proposed are identified to be less than 30 inches.
Okay, great.
And if that is the case and they're measured from existing grade, then they could technically project to the property line.
Okay. There's also been issue raised about which is the front PL. Are you requesting, Niles, that we consider Selva the front? Would that make things easier or better for you?
If we designated Selva as the front of the property, we have an alternate site plan that has 6 homes. And that would be great. However, we also feel that this 5-home plan with the setback along Primavera and having 5 homes is actually also a very good project. And it provided some interesting, a little bit more room for us in some ways to move homes around, especially with the elimination of the 6th home. And then we thought that the reduction of density would obviously be a lot more acceptable rather than trying to max it out. And so, as it turned out, when we found out that the Selva Road frontage, if it were the front setback with 6 homes, when we first heard about it, oh my goodness, okay, so we want to get that variance. But then as we worked it, okay, but let's see what happens with Primavera as the front. Oh, we got 5 homes, okay, but they're more regular. We had some very funny configurations in order to get 6 homes. So the 5 homes at the end of the day seem to be okay. If we could work through the height and story and this, we're discussing the small variance for the rear setback.
If I might also add to that, in the initial plan review, we routed the plans to the Public Works Department. Engineering had an opportunity to review the project. The original design provided a driveway entry also along Selva Road. The Public Works Department determined that based on the speed and the size of the street of Selva Road, that it was not a safe area if we could stand it, because this is a corner lot. There's 2 ways to get onto the lot. That Selva Road would not be an opportune location to access the lot. That obviously holds no weight on the determination of front lot lines. You can have a driveway in the rear or off to the side in certain lots, so just wanted to add that.
Okay.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Danny, because we also had a plan where we had these homes, first two homes, 1 and 2, actually had garage entrances off of Selva, and that way we could put the other 4 homes at a much lower elevation, because we didn't have to collect everybody's garage at one level or close to one level. But as it turned out, that was not a good idea either, because of the traffic engineer's comments about fronting onto Selva with driveways.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
we turned it around and we collected everybody off of one driveway as far down the hill as we could get it, so that we could balance being here, having garages and having homes, stepping it up as best we could in this really difficult site.
Okay. Lastly, was this meeting notice to neighbors?
The preliminary review requirements do not require that we notice the neighbors. As I stated earlier, there's 2 types of preliminary reviews. There's a staff level, and then there's a planning commission level. Both do not require noticing. At this point, we're just looking at ideas for this particular project, and in this particular case, staff felt that it'd be best if planning commission gave input, as we had a lot of similar questions that you do.
Okay. So with all my questions answered, I'd just like to give my 2 cents for the applicant's benefit or detriment, however they choose to take it. I think your design and what you've done is really creative. And when I saw kind of the courtyard parking solution, I thought that was great. There's a lot I like about it. I like the architecture. It seems like kind of a lot on that lot, but if it's allowed, that's fine. I'm concerned about, I personally have 0 issue with which lot we designate as front. It seems the access should come off of Primavera, but like he said, doesn't have to sync up with which is front and not. On the height, some of the images, there's a lot of mass near the public right-of-way. I agree with Chair Nelson about those kind of volume spaces near the front. Maybe those roofs should have a ridge line and come back down just to give a smaller mass near the street. Some of the setback, I don't have an issue with the patios in the front or the rear personally. Some of the variances that you're asking for are really not close. Like if max height is 24 feet and we're saying staff is determining it's 40 feet, that's kind of way out of whack. So I'd love if you could figure out a way to, maybe make the basements a true basement by our definition, and that saves you a bunch of footage, and then the variance requested is a lot smaller. But I think that I understand the site's super challenging. Keeping any structure up near Selva below 24 feet off of the back of walk of Selva is, something I would want to see personally. Thank you.
Commissioner Donor.
Yes. I looked at the shared driveway, and homes 1, 2, 4, and 5 all back out into the same space. It looks like that is a recipe for problems with all the residents that would be there. The other issue you mentioned earlier is the having the benefit of ownership versus a multifamily structure. But if you have a shared wall, when you have 6 foot between, it seems like if you shared a wall, that wouldn't take away anything from pride of ownership and people managing their own homes. The other issue I was looking at was, would you consider the garages to be tucked under the homes, so there would be less space required?
Yes, in fact, all of the garages are at the lowest level with a bedroom floor above it. And then, because of the slope of the site, we then take the living room, the living and the living floor, the main living floor, and then the bedroom floor above that, and offset it vertically by either half a level or also a full level in one particular case. So there's always a living level above the garage, but there are never two living levels above the garage. So there's always only 2 stories of structure that are slid vertically.
Well, I guess, you know, I'll just echo the number of deviations requested versus the concerns of the neighborhood would be something that we would have to take into serious consideration. Thanks.
Commissioner Opal? I don't have anything. Okay. I had one more comment for you because I just wanted to make sure I'm super clear. I don't have a concern with density here. In fact, if you came in with something that met the requirements of our city code and it was maxed out density-wise, I would be completely in favor of a project like that. Where the challenges come in is when we start trying to design with variances. That's obviously a concern that, given the legal requirements that we have to make findings. So just keep that in mind as well.
Thank you. You know, I guess in other locations, we've been, the ability to create a planned development is maybe a little bit easier to do, but here we cannot do a planned development. I don't think I forget the requirement as to what would allow us to do a planned development, but that's not open to us here. So we could theoretically design a more traditional multifamily project with flats, but you know, then we're looking at 1 or 2 really large buildings, the tuck under parking, and exactly the kind of building type or user type that the neighbors were very concerned with in the other location. So I think there's a lot to be said for these 5 individual homes not creating the same problems that are being perceived by other people.
Well, I would caution you and have you look at those plans because those were detached homes that provided a significant amount of separation between each one of them.
Yeah, I was looking at, but they were also flats, I believe, weren't they? No, they were
Those are
individual
singles.
homes.
Could arguably be single-family homes, but they're duplex units because there's 2 units on each lot. So you might want to take a look at those plans, and you'll get a sense of what you heard versus what was presented were 2 different things.
Yeah, and also the number of bedrooms. We only have 1 home that has 4 bedrooms. All these are 3-bedroom,
Gotcha.
2.5 bath, or 3.5 bath. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Murphy, do you have anything?
Just looks like a fun project to me.
Right. Okay, well, we appreciate you coming out tonight. There's no action for us to take, so
Understand.
The public's welcome to come up and speak. I don't know if we have any comment cards or speaker cards, but, okay.
That gentleman is the developer's father, so.
Great. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and close this
And
item.
thank you very much for your consideration this evening. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Appreciate you coming out. And I would also suggest you make sure you guys reach out to the neighborhood as well, because they're definitely going to want to probably have some feedback. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close that item. I think that ends our agenda for tonight, if I'm not mistaken, but let me make sure. So that's item 4. Do we have any staff reports?
Just real quick, I wanted to mention, and you likely all noticed today, that just sort of as a new protocol, we're going to start copying all the commissioners on the legal notices when we send those out. It gives a little advance notice in advance of the staff reports, which trail a couple days later. If you have any questions, always feel free to contact the project planner.
Yeah, thanks. I think that was Commissioner Donor started that, so that was a good suggestion. And thanks for responding to that. Commissioner comments, starting to my far left.
I'd like to thank Matt and the staff for being reacting so quickly to my request and to putting something in place that's to the benefit of all the commissioners. And that's all I have.
All right. Commissioner Opal? No? All right. I think I said it, but I rode the trolley a couple weeks. Actually, did I tell it? Yeah, I rode it again. And I have to admit, I stood at the wrong place, but the map says Silver Lantern if you look at the trolley map, but the stop is actually one street up. It's actually not Silver Lantern, so maybe something to get with Public Works. Because I stood at the end of Silver Lantern and the trolley guy would not stop, and I was pissed until I looked at the sign and realized it wasn't a trolley stop, so. But then we ran across the street and caught another one and had a great time, so I really enjoyed that. And appreciated everybody's working together tonight. This was a lot of stuff to get through quickly and productive meeting. That is all I have.
I guess I appreciate staff and all they do, and seeing your guys' workspaces, we can tell how, varied you all are. And I just wanted to comment on, I don't know, is it appropriate to comment on a vote we took tonight?
Depends on what you're going to say. No, I'm kidding.
Well,
Go ahead.
It was a tough,
I'll throw something at you if I need you to
It
stop.
it was a tough vote, the first item, with all the people opposed. But I'm proud of, the vote that we made, and, it's just hard sometimes because you wish that people had a different perspective on things, or they could be more fully informed or more receptive to what we have to consider and can't consider and so forth. So anyway, thank you.
On that note, too, on the first item, I wanted to make some statements because yeah, but in the end run, I did the right thing. But in voting the way I did. But I did want to say, Derek, I've been riding the trolley a lot, and I only live 2 miles from the area, but I've been riding the trolley a lot because I love the music they play.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my gosh, you get on one of those, and the wind's whipping through, and there's some people there, and that music is just fantastic. Oh, it's great. So
Right on.
I suggest it for everyone.
We were in a good mood when we got off after listening to Michael Jackson, and there was some great music. You're right, forgot about that, so thank you. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of this meeting, and we will adjourn until, July 10th.
We're done. Don't forget to leave my book.